Good morning, everyone. We are just waiting for everyone to connect. So we'll be starting in about 20 seconds. But good to see so many people joining us this morning. Okay, I think we have quite a few people connecting, so let's kick off. So yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Helen Muzzard and I am the CMO for IAB Europe. Welcome to our second event in our Trust and Transparency event series. Throughout September, we are hosting a series of virtual events and podcasts to discuss and debate trust and transparency in the digital industry. I'm delighted today to be joined by Daniel Knapp, who is the Chief Economist for IAB Europe, and he's written a new research report on the wider socio-economic and cultural value of targeted advertising. Today, Daniel will share his findings, and then he'll be joined by an expert panel to discuss some of his conclusions. Before I pass over to Daniel, as you can see, we are live. We are both at home. And because we're live, it means that it's a great opportunity for you to ask the panel and Daniel any questions that you have about what he's going to present over the next 15 minutes. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there is a Q&A box. So please post your questions in there and then also in the chat box. The session is being recorded today and we will be uploading this onto the IAB Europe website this afternoon. At the very end of the session, we will share a link to the presentation and to Daniel's paper so that you can obtain that. So with that, I will hand over to Daniel.
Thank you very much, Helen, and welcome everybody. Pleased to see so many of you here. I would like to kick off with a presentation that summarizes the key findings from the report that I authored over the summer. This report stands in context of a larger series of reports we've conducted since 2014 that tries to explore the relationship between the digital ad industry and the EU economy overall. So this has implications for economic growth, for policy, but also how we as an industry develop our industry further. Today's report is about the sometimes underappreciated, not just economic, but socio-economic and also the cultural value of targeted advertising in Europe, which I seek to illustrate through a series of arguments that are backed by statistics and other empirical evidence. I make some broader conclusions and then open up to the panel. I think let's dive into the agenda. So there are 4 points I would like to stress today. First is that targeted digital advertising, however we define targeting, enables the proliferation of small and medium-sized businesses in Europe, which are the backbone of the European economy. Secondly, these are not just any SMEs, but they also operate in sectors which have special cultural value and wider positive effects on regional social structures in Europe. So it's not just any business, but they're specifically deeply interwoven into the wider fabric of social life in Europe. As Europe ushers into a digital era backed by ambitious industrial policies authored by the European Commission, we're seeing in the same way venture capital funding growing, and we see European champions across very different sectors maturing on the European stage and seeking to enter a global stage. And for those, targeted advertising is a key instrument of sustainable business growth. And lastly, I would be amiss to not mention the fourth estate, the pluralistic exchange of opinion through media, through publishing and so forth, where targeted advertising, but also the data-driven innovation much more widely, of which targeting is an expression, is essential to ensure that we remain this pluralist, vibrant public sphere that is so important in Europe. Before we do start into these 4 topics, I would just like to provide a reminder on what are we talking about when we speak about targeting. The world of advertising is completely being re-architected based on new approaches that marry the ability to address audiences and to be privacy first. While I won't go into detail today, it's just very important that how we frame targeting is changing a lot from logged in users and first-party data to IDs shared between media companies in a privacy compliant way, to moving away from one-on-one targeting to more segment-based targeting, for instance, in publisher segments or towards AI-driven models, but also to contextual ways of targeting, where it isn't really about the individual person at all, but more widely about the editorial environment, time of day, and so forth. And it's this whole toolbox of approaches that I subsume under the broader notion of targeting, sometimes being substituted by addressability, personalization, and so forth. If we look back at 2020, we saw that digital advertising really helped to mitigate the COVID-19 impact on the European economy. We have progressively upwardly revised our ad spend forecasts for Europe, and while traditional media continued to suffer, we had a fairly consistent estimate for those at minus 21%, digital fared better than expected. And the core reason for that actually was the dynamism that we saw in the small and medium-sized enterprises, i.e. the SME sector in Europe. And this sector is of particular importance to the European economy. Indeed, the European Commission itself calls SMEs the backbone of Europe's economy in every sector, as this quote says here. And it's not just that they're any company, but they bring innovative solutions to key problems that we as a society seek to address: climate change, resource efficiency, energy, and so forth. But also, as I mentioned earlier, social cohesion. And I'll touch on that in a bit more detail over the course of my presentation. So SMEs need to thrive in Europe for the European economy and society to thrive. And their health is particularly important as we transition, number one, to a digital economy, but secondly, also to preserve and to grow Europe's prosperity, technological sovereignty, and so forth. So if advertising and SMEs are intertwined, we need to make sure that we have advertising solutions and a policy environment that ensures that those SMEs are able to thrive. And indeed, if we dive into the statistics, we see 21 million SMEs in the EU in 2021, current year, that employ over 80 million people. There are differences between countries. For instance, Malta, nearly 94% of all the value-added product of the economy comes from SMEs. In Germany, for instance, it's a bit lower, but still incredibly high at 82%. And the average value is around 56%. So over half of the gross value add of the economy is actually coming from small and medium-sized businesses. But as we all know, COVID-19 has had an impact on SME revenues. If we look at this survey from McKinsey, we can see in key European countries that the impact on companies' revenues was somewhat or even greatly reduced during the pandemic. So as we come out of this pandemic now, we need to ensure that SMEs can continue to grow and increase their revenues. But there are two sides of the story. While some SMEs were severely impacted, as the study shows, we've at the same time seen new vibrancy when it comes to company formations. Data from the Statistical Office in Germany shows that new company registrations in 2020 versus 2019, if we compare, just the start of H2, actually outpaced 2019. So based on the structural changes that COVID brought to all of our lives and our economy, new solutions and new ideas were actually being put into practice quite early. And Financial Times and other publications were more systematically exploring the same theme across other global, but also particular European economies. And it's clear why this is the case, as new solutions are required as we transact and consume differently. We saw a strong increase in the amount of people who, for the first time, or who increased their volume of e-commerce purchases. And as you can see on this chart here from Eurostat, more than 2/3 of the internet population in Europe used e-commerce in 2020. In this environment, SMEs, or some like Accenture call SMBs, have been forced to build resilience and to disrupt their models. So they've become increasingly reliant on online channels. They're going to run their core business during the day, but transform at night. I think that puts it quite poetically. So lots of structural change going on in this sector. It's becoming quite clear then why digital advertising is so important. And we see some ad forecasters, Magna Global, for instance, Group M and others, coming out with data. This one here is, I think, interesting because it's monthly from Borrell Associates. It's US data, but it shows kind of the change of perception in small and medium-sized businesses. They've seen digital advertising as a lifeline, as the core business collapsed and they needed to find new customers and build a digital model. Well, without digital advertising, targeted digital advertising, that customer acquisition would have become incredibly hard. And we've seen that as the pandemic progressed, that the impulse to spend less on advertising actually changed, and more companies were holding or actually increasing their budgets. And this is also the case if we look at this. So while this was a transitional picture over a couple of months, we can see just how important SMEs are for the European digital ad market and how reliant they are on digital ad channels. On the very left side, you can see a split composition, all media advertising, major marketers versus small and medium-sized enterprises as defined by the European Commission. And we can see there are around 44% pre-pandemic that make up the overall ad spend in Europe. But if we look at the digital ad spend share of major marketers, the major brand advertisers versus the SMEs, we can see a much stronger reliance on digital from the SMEs. And actually, lower barriers of entry, better cost management, etc., all contribute to that. And not only is this important for domestic European economies, but fundamentally also for our single market. SMEs are important facilitators for the cross-border exchange of goods and services in Europe. And actually, if we look at, this is still EU28 data, including the UK, it's the latest we got from 2017. Actually, when it comes to exports, we can see that there's a strong tendency of SME exports actually between different European countries. This is even echoed by digital ad spending patterns, where when we do an analysis on our own ad spend data for just the EU27, we can see that 15% of digital ad spend, or around 6.6 billion, was transnational spend, i.e. advertising spend that one advertiser from one country spent to acquire and to retain customers, make aware of products and so forth in another European country, that is. So showing that SME growth, transnational commerce, and advertising are interlinked. Targeted advertising really fuels the SME business success because, as I mentioned, they need to diligently measure the return on investment so they can minimize wastage and reach relevant consumers. And that's for them more important than any other type of business, and targeting really enables that because it reduces the gap in product characteristics desired by the consumer on the one hand, and the kind of matched product that is being then shown to the consumer. And they cannot really afford to send ad messages to consumers who are not interested in the products and services, so they need to reduce this wastage. And that's in particular important if we look at cost management and growth in post-COVID recovery. And it's not just us or other economists saying that, but it's even Margrethe Vestager from the European Commission in the context of the future of targeted ads, saying how important it is for small and medium-sized businesses to have those tools at their hands in order to thrive. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation that it's not just about SMEs as such, but also about SMEs that have a certain cultural significance in Europe. There's a wide-ranging report authored in 2019 from the Commission that tries to quantify the economic value of so-called EU quality schemes. So products of geographical indications or traditional specialties guaranteed, all different acronyms to show kind of key goods. It could be local manufacturing, it could be wine, food and cheese products, and so forth. And that actually had a value of around 75 billion euros back then, 2019, in the EU28. And that report explicitly identifies marketing as a key factor in making such goods commercially available to continue to protect those specialties and goods of cultural significance in a sustainable manner. A particularly striking case study during the COVID pandemic was Italy, a country marred by bureaucracy sometimes, and that was lagging behind its European peers in its overall digitization. The Financial Times put out a huge report that looked at how Italy's economic recovery was really aided by digital transformation. And advertising, again, here played a core part. And there's a very striking quote from a tie maker from Bellagio in northern Italy at the lakes, who started with a small business to dive into search engine optimization and search ads at the age of 70. So it showed that traditional physical businesses really moved online. And there are other examples in this report and others that really shows how, in particular in regions of Italy, for instance, glasses manufacturing in the Veneto, for instance, where there's where entire towns or villages specialize on producing a certain type of quality good, they need to market that digitally, and the success of that single economy in their particular region is important for the overall prosperity of the region and their social cohesion. Meaning there's an indirect effect between the ability to market and sell those goods in other regions and cross-border in Europe, and actually the prosperity of that specific region and the cultural good that the EU deems to protect. Another sector, of course, is the tourism sector. And we can see, if we look at some OECD tourism statistics, how important this is in specific European countries. If we look at ad spend, there are several studies out there, like this one from Sojourn and Dynata. It shows that SMEs within the travel sector over-index on digital ads. This is particularly important, as we need to bear in mind, now travel is picking up again, that not only the travel sector is a strong contributor to GDP and the economy, can protect, done rightly, local ways of life and so forth, but that the entire product experience of travel, apart from the physical enjoyment itself, is moving online. The discovery process, the booking process, the in-destination planning, and so forth. And that means that before and during the trip, digital advertising becomes a key infrastructure on which the entire industry operates. And with small and medium-sized businesses, and tourism, once you're there, being extremely local, requires, of course, the ability to target, and also, of course, for the requirement to manage and control budgets. So it's not something optional for tourism, but it's integral to the continued success and recovery of the tourism sector in Europe. Moving away from SMEs to an entirely different topic about the so-called European champions, i.e. venture capital funded or startup companies in Europe that are, or scale-ups that are growing. And Europe is increasingly becoming a key geography for venture funding and for startups, not lagging behind in terms of vibrancy of other regions in the world. But as those companies seek to compete globally and seek to acquire customers in Europe, they need to be very cost effectively, and they need to acquire customers, reduce churn, grow basket size, and so forth. And for that, targeting is actually essential. The great case that is out there, for instance, from Berlin-based Delivery Hero, that could lower its customer acquisition costs using targeting by over 40%. And also many of these companies realize that advertising isn't something to be outsourced. It's not a nice to have, but it's so important to the business, using the first party data of the business, that it's becoming an internal role. In our industry, we speak a lot about in-housing, i.e. the move of dedicated service functions outside within the advertising, within the companies that do advertising themselves, i.e. the Delivery Heroes, the Klarnas of the world. And it's so important that these companies are actually in-housing these experts to leverage the power of digital targeted advertising. And if you go into those job descriptions, they very much echo what the European Commission itself sees as integral for its data and AI strategy. Wrangling data, building statistical models, coding, etc., data visualization. Not only is targeted advertising or digital marketing itself important, but it also reflects the broader industrial and employment policy that the European Commission is pursuing. Now, this quote, I think, puts it very nicely, that marketing and innovation are the core functions of business. And as an industry and as a society and economy, we need to ensure that marketing is able to continue to produce innovations to ensure that Europe remains competitive in a digital and global age. I would be amiss to not talk about the fourth estate, about a pluralist media landscape. And indeed, we see many European media companies adopting privacy-first measures and being trailblazers globally in moving to the use of identifiers of first-party data and so forth to ensure that addressability is privacy-first and is future-proof. And it's important that if we want to protect our European media ecosystem and the ability to have a fourth estate as a democratic corrective, that we actually support from an industry and political perspective those solutions. Lastly, we can also see that in the audiovisual landscape, multi-screen offerings in Europe pursued by broadcasters and other video players, often fueled by local tech. We need to be very careful that we're not entering what I would call an EU media innovation paradox, where on the one hand, for instance, the Commission has recognized to reboot the European media sector with many tenders, with new funding and so forth. But if there's an impending or potential blanket ban on targeted advertising, this could have risk of having knock-on effects, not just on targeting per se, but more widely on the certainty under which digital and transformation-led initiatives that use data are being executed by European companies, such as our media lighthouses. So we need to be sure that we minimize the risk of undermining actually the EU's own policy aims of strengthening the European media ecosystem. To conclude my presentation, I would like to make 3 points. First, targeted advertising is more than mere business, as my examples have illustrated. It provides vital support for SMEs, the backbone of the European economy. It's intertwined with also European cultural goods and social cohesion locally. It's a growth engine for European champions and therefore an expression actually of the industrial policy that Europe is pursuing, and it also supports a pluralistic media landscape. We need to move beyond ideological debates, in particular in the policy sphere, to carry this forward and really find what the industry is doing through its new approaches, a genuine European way, with many European companies actually leading the way here and exporting privacy-first paradigms to other countries around the world to balance how targeted advertising benefits the European economy and the social values and cultural norms that Europe is known for. And lastly, to widen the scope, this isn't just about advertising. The discussion that we are often having about the value of data, the value of targeting, it is going to pervade all industries as the economy at large becomes underpinned by data, becomes algorithmified and so forth. We in the ad industry have gone through many iterations of changing our approach, of refining it and making it future-proof and coming up with new creative solutions on how targeting and privacy are not mutually exclusive, but actually work together. So in that sense, advertising can provide a recipe or can be a trailblazer as the first large industry to develop and deploy solutions that really allow this use of data while preserving privacy and other cultural values. So advertising is not this one industry that is doing targeting and but in fact is a model industry that is ahead of other industries, other sectors of the economy on how a digital transformation, sometimes through trial and error, but sometimes also through major new bets and new policies and concerted industry effort is actually ushering us into a digital era. Thank you very much for your attention. The report will be available this afternoon. As Helen said, if you have any questions, do feel free to reach out. And with that, thank you for your attention, and I'll pass back to Lauren. Lauren, we can't hear you.
Hi, Daniel, it's Helen. We're just going to connect now you with your panelists who will be joining. So if you'd like to do an introduction to your panelists, and they will be shortly joining you.
Wonderful. We'd like to explore this topic further with 3 stellar panelists, all coming from different areas in the industry, representing different companies with a particular kind of continental European footprint. We got Karen Singh, the commercial director for Zander, Rick Jones, regional vice president, Western Europe at Adform, and also Masha Dreesen, the regional VP for continental Europe at Microsoft Advertising. So they all have experienced similar trends and tendencies that I've just outlined, and we want to use the panel to really provide some color and additional comments around those themes. So welcome everybody. How are you?
Oh, good. Thank you, Daniel.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I really look forward to our discussion. So you've seen my presentation, and I think one of the terms that really struck me when I was preparing my report and going through official documents, bureaucratic documents was actually the relative passion with which these documents were talking about SMEs as the lifeblood of the European economy. That's a very strong term for public officials. So why was, from your perspective as practitioners, why was digital advertising such a lifeblood for small and medium-sized businesses, particularly during 2020? Masha, I'd love to start with you.
Thank you, Danielle. So first of all, thanks also for presenting the insights, because it's really what we see happening in industry and also much more than that. So answering your question, if we see the behavioral shifts over the last 18 months, they're of course no longer new, and they seem to be sustained even as people return to more kind of normal lives. And this change in behavior has impacted advertising as well. So if we look at PC search volume, that increased significantly over the past 18 months, evidence that everyone is spending more time online and more time searching from their PCs. So also advertisers and businesses needed to adapt fast and also transform, right? So specifically small and regional businesses successfully filled that emptiness that consumers faced, and they were also able to respond quickly with more agility than many larger businesses, evidenced by the new acronym that we are using is BOPIS, which is buy online, pick up in store. So agile businesses of all sizes, so not just SMBs, right, quickly welcomed their new customers and they enhanced their communities. And they were also able to tailor their advertising in real time, adapting to the situation consumers had, in front of them, which was all new. And digital advertising, and especially search advertising, doesn't require for advertisers to build, complicated and expensive ads or, videos, which takes more time and also more money. And the same applies for buying that. It's, easy, fast, and accessible through the self-service tools. And lastly, I also brought some interesting data points from a survey that was done during the pandemic by Salesforce, that 63% of millennial consumers say they're more likely to support small businesses with digital presence. And also 71% of SMBs say their customers expect online transactions, and nearly the same proportion have an e-commerce presence. So those are really, really impactful numbers, of course.
That's fascinating, and I think just wanted to come back to one thing that you said, which was about kind of cost and speed, right? And in my presentation, I talked about the barriers of entry. So you were seeing from a Microsoft perspective that the lower barriers of entry are really crucial for the development of the SME sector. Did I get that right?
Yeah, for sure. Can you imagine if you are, a bakery, you are SME, that's what you do well, right? You're not into advertising. So this is just a side task that is necessary to make sure that you continue your business. So as long as we make it simple and easy and accessible, then SMBs can pick up also quite quickly, as we have seen during the pandemic.
That's an interesting point in the sense that SMEs, and actually the majority of SMEs in Europe, when we look at the European Commission data, they have up to 9 employees, right? And to your point, it's very unlikely that there's a dedicated advertising function in the business, but many are masters of many trades, and advertising is just one thing that they need to do on top, with often very limited budgets. Yeah. And Rick, I'd love to hear your perspective as well. In particular, how you and your company saw kind of SMEs operating during the last couple of months versus potentially some other clients.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the low barrier to entry, and I think it's worth us all remembering that barrier was low at the start of the pandemic, and actually a lot of these SMEs were immediately thrown into sink or swim situations. So there was no time for things to develop in terms of how they could advertise, but what they had to do themselves was adapt really quickly and use digital advertising as quickly as possible to reinvent how they did business, to repair or replace supply chains that no longer existed or were completely disrupted. And also worth remembering, to that point, a lot of companies weren't even using digital channels at all. And so, the ecosystem that they then tapped into really began 20 years ago with AdWords. where you have that very low barrier to entry. You know, anyone can put ads on a search engine, and that's been the case for a long time. What they can now do, of course, is be highly targeted. And again, that comes back to your point a moment ago about efficiency, about reduced wastage. It's that ability to be highly targeted and very efficient about how they advertise, and do it with relatively small amounts of money if they want to, that has really made the difference, I think.
And are you expecting, as the economy opens up, are you expecting these digital spend patterns or the importance of kind of digital marketing channels and targeting to persist for those SMEs?
Yes, because again, as I think you pointed out in your report, I mean, already the backbone of the European economy is the SMEs, and they are probably growing faster than most sectors. And we'll come on, I think, to talk about, you know, the startup element of that as well. So yeah, we can only see the fuel of growth coming, and demand for digital advertising coming more and more from that sector, for sure, for the reasons we talked about.
Thanks, Ray. And Karen, now you also have a particular insight on, of course, through your company, on convergence and other effectiveness indicators that digital advertising enables. So could you talk us quickly through why, from your view, SMEs in particular rely on targeting, and how quickly they can see results?
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, for SMEs, I mean, we've kind of talked about this, they have an inability to compete with bigger players in terms of broad brush advertising, such as TV mediums, etc. So they have to rely on mediums such as digital advertising to get in front of a consumer. At a very basic level, I think the way in which a lot of these SMEs compete is with a tailored offering. And it's crucial for them to get that tailored offering in front of the right people in a timely manner. And digital advertising really allows for this. So if I think of personally in my situation, so we've just completed a house renovation, and it's a point in time where I need certain goods and services. And what digital advertising and SMEs has given me as a consumer is a plethora of choice. And through digital advertising, they were able to talk to me with an offering which immediately resonated and allowed me to kind of weigh up options and pick the right options for me. And in terms of from a consumer advertiser balance, that was huge in creating that relationship, and that was all facilitated through digital advertising and through targeting to some degree. That doesn't have to be intrusive. It doesn't have to feel like it's encroaching on my privacy, but it's giving me a service and an offering at a time where I really do need that message. I need that service. So for me, I think it can be hugely effective at allowing these sorts of businesses to compete and thrive.
And you'd say that's an interesting point, right? Lower the barrier of entry, allow these businesses to compete, find customers locally. But you also say, and that goes back to the first slide that I mentioned, that it doesn't need to be intrusive, right? So could you talk a little bit more to our audience about how even aggregates can or new ways of targeting can help those businesses?
Yeah, so for sure, I think. And you mentioned this in the report, targeting often people default straight to one-to-one, and something that feels very intrusive. Even the word targeting in itself feels like an intrusive term, but it doesn't always mean that one-to-one kind of communication. We've seen at Xandr the last kind of 12 months where we've been exploring and testing solutions that one-to-few can be as effective as one-to-one. And targeting can be really creative and take other guises as well. So one of the best examples that I've seen is for a retro camera brand, targeting against content that evokes a feeling of nostalgia. Now, for me, that's still targeting. It's not obtrusive at all, and it was just a really creative method of getting in front of the right people at a time when they're in the right frame of mind. So things like that can be as effective, and I think a blanket ban on all targeting would really impact that ability to innovate and be creative and do new things that drives results.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's an interesting point, right? And if we look back in the history of media, for instance, since the start of commercial television in the kind of 1960s, there was always targeting, but just didn't call it like that. It was always about finding relevant interest groups to reduce wastage. And in a society where you know, it was all about keeping up with the Joneses, and there was a rising, fairly homogeneous middle class. Broadcast and broad reach media could really do that. But we also already saw technical innovations like the rise of cable channels, of kind of niche channels and so forth, which in a sense were not just outlets for content, but they were also means of audience segmentation. The entire, you know, flourishing magazine industry was the same. So yes, we are now in a data-driven world, but that logic of addressability, which is behind targeting methods as an approach, really is historically linked to what advertising has always been about. And Rick, I spoke about the, well, big industrial policies in Europe to become a data-driven economy. You, with that form, are such a European company itself. So how do you see your company yourself kind of embedded in this innovation narrative?
It's obviously a great question for us, because yes, you know, we're born 20 years ago nearly in Denmark, and we're now a big global player, 30 offices around the world, but remain very much a European company, born and grown here. And to your point earlier, we can't underestimate the benefit of having a flourishing digital advertising industry in Europe itself. You know, that in itself is a huge employment benefit, and for the economy overall. So that has to be one factor. But then it's, of course, what we do to fuel the economy overall. And we already talked about SMEs, but I can also tell you, for example, you know, some of our biggest and most important clients are big European players like IKEA and Vodafone and BMW, using the platform to run their digital advertising, you know, targeting their customers, increasingly using first-party data to do that as they move away from you know, third-party cookies, and really trying to live with the new norm that will come when the Chrome change happens. But yes, you know, this is all part as well of the digital transformation story for those companies, not only those big companies, but again, right back down to SMEs, because what the pandemic did in an extraordinary way is accelerate, as you said, digital transformation, and all the benefits that will bring. Many of them will be lost, and the value will be lost if you don't complete the process. If you transform your business and how you operate, if you don't then complete the cycle by extending that all the way to the customer or potential new customers, then you have wasted so much of the value of that digital transformation exercise in itself. So that's again why this is so important, as something that we need to preserve and make sure is an opportunity for businesses to use and to help them to thrive, and for the European economy to thrive.
I think in your answer, there's a very interesting independence observable, right, in this whole digital transformation strategy in Europe. You, as a European company, are yourself an example of successful digital data-driven economy in Europe that is vital to be and to thrive in the European Union. But you're also helping other European businesses to thrive and to usher in that world. So when we look at it kind of economically, when we look at gross value add, which is kind of how much money is being put into the economy, through which stages, and then how is it multiplied through employment, through sales benefits, and so forth. What you have or describing here is, in a sense, a part of the economy which, from the customer to the enabler, to which I would then count you, plus the employment, which is genuinely European.
It really is. And of course, you know, we're all global companies here on the call, as are most players at scale in ad tech, of course, by definition. But yes, you know, the fact that we are at heart European and have a very strong presence across all markets, and our heritage is here. It means that, for example, back to probably the fourth estate discussion, we have inherently very close relationships with a lot of publishers as well. And so when you think about supporting that ecosystem, our focus is naturally also aligned to theirs. in terms of how we do that, and particularly when we're talking about a first party and ID driven future that we're now all moving towards rapidly. So yes, it's very much a European benefit that I think we directly bring. Yeah, and
you're absolutely right. When we look at employment statistics, when we see how the digital advertising sector has built offices and expertise, international companies have really doubled down on Europe in building staff, moving from that, particularly some startups in the past from mainly sales offices to development offices, nurturing really this wide range of skills that are important for the digital transformation. So both native European and also other companies that are doubling down on European staff are crucial for that.
I must just add quickly on that point. We employ 350 developers. Most of them are in Lithuania and Poland and some other European locations. So yes, absolutely to that point as well.
And Masha, talking about Europe, you are based in Amsterdam, and of course exposed to a lot of different cultural inputs. So I'll start with you with the question of SMEs in Europe that often have particular cultural value. I gave some examples from Italy and so forth. How do you see at Microsoft, and also personally, how those specific types of SMEs are being helped by digital advertising?
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. And, listening also to what has been said about digital transformation, the pandemic truly has, helped speeding that up, not just with the larger companies, but with so many companies that really needed to speed it up, right? So, and building that bridge to advertising helps to make these areas of cultural significance become more accessible to a broader group of people, obviously. As it grows awareness, and it also allows people to make a choice on a path based on knowledge that are given to them, which they may not have known if the World Wide Web wasn't there. Mm. So as an example, as you say, I live in Amsterdam indeed. I may have a product I'm keen to buy, but I'm not aware or even know of its original origin or how it is supporting a community, right? So instead of making a purchase based on best deal, maybe just on price, for instance, that may come from somewhere outside of the EU, advertising can make me aware and give me the right information so I can make the decision that aligns with my preferences. So in that sense, to me, targeting it is kind of such a welcome difference in comparison to what you said, on TV and on the early 60s. That was, of course, a whole different time, but targeting is a blessing, right, on this. And for example, I'm fond of Portuguese food, and through the web and also ads, due to my own online behavior, I'm lucky to be able to buy online that food by being in Amsterdam. So reasoning from the point of view from also, for example, the tourism company or the producer of goods with the protected origin, it enables them to actually reach an audience that otherwise never would have found them. Compare it with going to a city that you've never been, then the internet with its highly useful targeted advertising is your local buddy. That would have shown you the best places if it was a human and you'd otherwise never had known of or had experience. So to me, it's such a blessing.
That's interesting, right? So as the socio-cultural makeup changes, as new products and services become available, targeting or saying approaches how advertising reaches people need to change, and they need to be, I think we often think it's sort of the technology and the industry that is changing society, but it's not really unidirectional. So what you're saying is that the approaches that we use in advertising, they need to reflect pre-existing socio-cultural trends, which might be, diversity of food, of cultural offerings, etc.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, this is all about intent. So the actions that I take on the web as a consumer or each consumer, it's not about me as a person, right? We should take person out of personalized, because it's not really about me as a person, it's more about my behavior. And this helps me because I have a certain intent why I am watching something or why I'm searching for something. And that helps me. If there's good targeting applied, yeah, like I say, that's a blessing because it's not annoying, it's not intrusive, it's actually exactly what aligns with my intent. So we've come a long way, of course, back to TV in the 60s and to where we are now. And we're still not there, right? Because the world is evolving. Because there's also the question of we shouldn't only see where our intent is, because then I never get exposed to new things, right? So there's always a balance there. But the world that we're in today, to me, is much, much better because it's a lot less intrusive than where we were in years ago.
I think there's a very important nuance in what you just said, that personalization, and there are other ways of targeting as well, but let's stick with that at the moment. Personalization doesn't mean interest in the person. It just means addressing an ad to a specific person because the advertiser, the company, is interested in people with similar properties, with similar interests, etc. So although the delivery of the ad might be individual, advertisers still, like in the 60s and the 70s, they're interested in averages, in types of people, not in individuals themselves. I think, and that's a very important nuance that in particular in political debates is really often overlooked. But let's move from Portuguese food in Amsterdam to another really exciting and tasty topic, which is the exploding landscape of startups, scale-ups, and venture funding in Europe. Karen, when you look at your customers, kind of hyper-growth companies and so forth, why do they need targeted advertising, and why is it so important in their kind of scale-up economics in particular?
Yeah, so I don't think the answer is too dissimilar to the SME challenge, actually. It is all about competing, thriving, growing quickly, and most importantly, getting the right message in front of the right person. I would say, if you're a startup, getting VC funding must feel like a blessing and a curse, in that you have the investment to go and kind of do what you want to do when you set out with your business strategy. However, with that comes very, very stringent targets, growth targets, and they're often quite aggressive. So digital advertising and targeting is so crucial for those businesses in being able to achieve those. And you gave the example, I think it was Delivery Hero or whatever it was, that were able to decrease massively their cost per acquisition through targeting and digital advertising. That is crucial if you've got ambitious growth targets that you need to hit in order to hit that next round of funding and that next kind of iteration of your growth. So for me, it's easy to see why that reliance is so strong on digital advertising. And if targeting went away and the amount of wastage increased, it would become so much more difficult for those businesses to thrive and grow through those periods of hyper growth. And I feel like we as the consumer, if we go back to that, are the kind of end recipients of that. If you think of all the startups that have kind of been born out of the last 10, 15 years, and how that's truly changed the way in which we shop, eat, drink, do everything, they're born out of being able to kind of grow quickly and survive, because it's so cutthroat. If they're not able to acquire customers and hit those targets very quickly, they'll just disappear. So for me, that's really the answer to the question in terms of why they're so reliant on it, and why a blanket ban on targeting in all its guises would just do so much harm to their ability to kind of grow, thrive, and exist.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I think in particular, we mentioned Delivery Hero, but also there are many now in Europe, last mile delivery companies in urban centers using cargo bikes and other things, which are eco footprint, etc. This is still, despite the public debate, a fairly narrow target group. And I think we need to preserve the ability, if we want to change our economy, the way we do business, and be more sustainable, to allow targeted advertising to play an enabling role in that. And Rick, I know that you have a view on this topic as well, about venture and digital advertising.
Yeah, I contrast, a bit back to when I started in this industry, good 20 years plus ago, and it was the startup period, the startup boom then, around the turn of the millennium, and you didn't have these options open to you. As a startup, as an SME, you didn't have the barrier to entry was high. So a bit to Karen's point, you had to run a big brand awareness raising campaign on TV, and that was untargeted. And you really had to have deep pockets. You had to have a large amount of investment just to get yourself off the ground. And the big difference now is, of course, again, as has been described already, the barrier to entry is lower. You can prove yourself on much lower budgets, and you can do that in a very efficient way. So here's the thing, back to Europe, and Europe competing with the US and with the East. And if Europe doesn't embrace that fact and doesn't nurture its startups, knowing that digital advertising is an absolutely essential part, Europe will have a huge competition problem. And as we know, the lifespan of companies and how quickly they grow is accelerating every decade, every year. So innovation, as you, I think, put in your report, is the lifeblood of that, and the velocity at which you can nurture that innovation is essential, and it's becoming even more essential every year. So that's why the digital advertising part of that is absolutely vital.
Yeah. I think that's a very powerful statement. And there's innovation, but there's also preserving what we have, an important fourth estate, checks and balances through media, through press, through citizens, and so forth, to hold those in power to account. And the pluralist media landscape is, of course, also very important for that. And now, Masha, you look at this topic very closely, and could you share with us how data-driven advertising and targeting models are important to keep that model thriving in today's world?
Well, this is about competition, right? Competition can thrive, but only if we all continue to invest in building addressable and accountable environments that are supported by a scaled ecosystem of partners. So it means enabling service providers and users to benefit from the open flow of information in a more privacy-preserving manner. So it also means working with coalitions, right, to define and implement standards together. And this is where industry collaboration is, I would say, critical. And at Microsoft, we don't just want to become another walled garden. So if we foster a web that is not open to all, a web that is dominated by a few major players, the digital ad marketplace of tomorrow, and consequently the web experience of tomorrow too, that will be at risk. So competition, to me, is an essential part of making the web a better place for all of us, not just for advertising. And competition fuels innovation and also price competition, because having a choice for consumers and advertisers, to me, is a fundamental aspect of what makes the web work. So basically, what I'm saying is that a trusted, free, and open web benefits everyone, and trusted what holds us all together. But without the tenets of free and open, the symbiosis breaks, right? And the internet becomes a place not for all, but only for a select few. So let's just make sure that we continue to partner together and that we have competition.
Mm-hmm. And just for the audience, we have 7 minutes left. I see some questions coming in. Please, if you have a question to the panelists about the report, please type it in the Q&A box, and we'll seek to address it either in the remaining minutes or after this session. Let me move to kind of a last topic. We talked about targeting, and I spoke about the many different manifestations that targeting can have. Masha, you made an important distinction between person and personalization. Karen, you talked about speaking about aggregates, not people. And I also said at the conclusion of my presentation that digital advertising can become a kind of benchmark industry for how other industries that are still going through this transition are managing notions of data and privacy. So I'd like to conclude with a kind of round from all of you. Do you think that targeting and privacy are highly compatible, and where are we in the industry?
I can go first if you like. So they're entirely compatible, and it really builds on, as you mentioned, a lot of the things that were said today and earlier on, that this myth or notion that somehow targeting is only one-to-one or relies on the one-to-one and somehow breaches the permission or privacy of that individual is just frankly nonsense, and we know that. And it's only, and because of the legislation that has been brought in by regulators, starting with GDPR and TCF 2.0 and everything else that's coming, is done for all the right reasons, and it creates the framework by which we can exclude bad actors who normally give this whole thing a bad name. But actually, everyone on this call will want to do the right thing, and they know that as soon as they breach privacy or become creepy or annoying or intrusive or bombard anyone they're trying to put a message in front of, they are doing themselves harm. It's not productive. Consumers will simply not accept it. So we're way beyond those days of crazy retargeting levels with frequency caps that were basically non-existent. We're in a much smarter world now, where we have regulation. We have responsible people who know that it's in their own interests to behave, to advertise in the right way when being very targeted. And then, as we all said, it's not about the individual, it's about relevancy, and it's about groups of people who've already indicated some form of interest in what you have to say to them. So all of that to me is a very good mix going forward.
Thanks, and yeah, I can build on that. So, of course, marketers are interested in being able to target the most relevant message to the right user, right? But how do you do that in a way that is privacy compliant and also respects the individual? That's the discussion that we're having. And how do you do that technologically? Because you're not going to set up 1 billion campaigns, of course, for 1 billion people that you want to reach. It's simply just not practical, nor it is good for the return on time spent or in trust on how we want to respect people in a trusted value exchange. So what we're saying from Microsoft is privacy is quite simply a human right. So that is because fundamentally we believe in the democratization of data, that users should have full control over their personal information and customers over their own data. And Microsoft believes that users should be in full and control of privacy, and brands should be in complete control of their own permissioned first-party data and the way they use it for, right? So it is not for a partner or a technology partner to dictate. Our role is to augment the capabilities of that data with intelligence and empower innovation with that while respecting privacy.
I think in terms of just building on that further, I think my kind of rationale for why I believe it is hugely compatible in a privacy first world is I think we need to do a better job of education. I think customers and consumers just generally are more acutely aware because of everything that's happening with regulation and press around kind of data. And it's become almost like a dirty word, but we don't talk about it in the context of creating relevance or creating open spaces like the internet. The fact that if targeting was to go tomorrow, advertising would still exist. It would just not be relevant and it would still be on your page. And in the absence of hundreds of paywalls, you're not going to have all the great content that you enjoy and all of those kind of all those things that come with advertising. And I don't think we're at a place yet where the consumer understands what I like to describe as a value exchange. So if you think of it as when it comes to something like couponing. So I come from a world where I used to work within loyalty schemes, and it's very much the case that the data is used to create relevant offers. And people really appreciate that because they know what the value exchange is between their shopping behavior and what they get in return in the post at the end of the month, and that equates to kind of money off. I don't think from an internet perspective or a digital perspective, we're quite there yet. So I think it is hugely compatible. I just think we need to go through that kind of iteration of education still.
Thank you very much all for these amazing contributions to help contextualize the report and really bring it to life from really informed practitioner points of view. Thank you very much for that. We have a few questions coming in, but mainly about data sources in the report, how people can get them. One question I quickly want to flag was an interesting one. That was when deciding the business model, mobile app developers usually choose between freemium models and subscription models. What are the report's findings about ad versus sub-income and the effect of targeted ban on advertising in this context? Great question. The report doesn't address this thing specifically, but I think what's very important here is there isn't really, for many subscription business, there isn't an either-or world, right? You can have ad income, but you still need to acquire your customers. So subscription-based revenue also requires ad models and a healthy ad ecosystem actually to make them work in the digital world. Dear audience, thanks a lot for your questions. Thanks a lot for your attention. We hope that this was informative and has really demonstrated why targeted advertising is just not important in pure numbers, but also more broadly looking at the socioeconomic and the cultural dimensions. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm going to pass back quickly to Lauren and Helen for some housekeeping and links to the report.
Hi, thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you so much to our panel. That was probably one of the best discussions I've had in a long while. We do lots of webinars, so really, really good just to get all of those case studies and just to hear everything. I've just put a link for everyone of the full report, which includes a 2-page summary, into the chat box so you can access it. It's up on our website, so please do take a look. And as mentioned, this has been recorded, so we'll be sharing this recording plus Daniel's presentation on our website this afternoon. So a big thank you to everyone, and we look forward to seeing you at some of our other trust and transparency events that we'll be running this month, which you can also find on our website. Brilliant, thanks. Have a lovely afternoon.